handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds HEVT, gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Denise Simon Experience. Very happy that you could be with us, where we are heard worldwide on Mojo 50. But I have a lawman with us, my texting buddy, Sheriff Mark Lamb of Pinal County, Arizona, who has been kind enough to come on and chat with us about all things Arizona and what's going on there. So with that, Sheriff, we're very happy you came along for the ride.
Thank you. I'm glad to be on.
I just read a piece, interestingly enough, that we have a mayor of Uvalde, Texas. I think Uvalde's only got 17,000 people in it. And he said, we're overrun. There are more migrants, immigrants, whatever we're going to call them, than there are citizens. The schools are overwhelmed. Hospitals are overwhelmed. Disease is everywhere. And he is freaked out. I have a sense that he's not the only mayor that would like to get on the air and say that. And certainly when it comes to sheriffs, they're seeing a lot of the same things. How about you, Sheriff?
You know, we don't see it as much here. We're more of a pass-through county. We are definitely seeing a lot of that. I know Yuma County Mayor has, down in Yuma, not the county mayor, but the mayor in Yuma, has expressed the same concerns. You know, they're just being overrun with folks coming claiming asylum and coming to the country legally. So, yeah, it's definitely an issue for some of the counties on our borders. Because we're a pass-through county, we don't get that. But it's still, we still have our own issues we're dealing with.
You're kind of almost in the Uber driver, go rescue and recover people, right?
We are constantly, so there's no give ups in our county. Nobody just crosses the border and says, hey, I'm giving up.
Oh.
Everybody we deal with, they're running from us. We're having to chase them down in the desert. They're getting into vehicles and they are fleeing from us. We're getting into pursuits with them. So I just posted something the other day about, you know, some of the 911 calls we've been getting. We don't actually get them. Those 911 calls come into Border Patrol. They are people, smugglers that are either passing out or, you know, out of water, they're lost, whatever it may be. And those calls are out of control right now.
So you're calling them, you don't have give ups. I mean, you are really having to do the whole kind of rescue or go chase. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. And even the rescues they're leaving them behind. We had one last week. They left them behind and just left them there laying there. And by the time we got to them, we had to give them 3 bags of IV fluids just to bring them back. So, and they had left them there. So we ended up tracking down the other 4 as well, the ones who had left them there. But they had no intentions of being caught or sticking around to make sure their compadre was in good health.
Now, is this smuggler a cartel or is he just a smuggler?
You know, it's really hard. They're very good at blending in. It's really hard to distinguish who is the coyote, who represents the cartel. To us, they all represent the cartel because they paid the cartel to come across the country. some of them want to come here and make a better life, but the ones coming in, most of what we have are people transporting drugs for the cartel, or they're being trafficked as a human being into this country, and they paid the cartel for that. So anybody we catch out there has done something to empower or further the cartel's operations.
Sheriff, when you and your deputies are watching the news, or maybe you don't watch the news, but if you do, and they're on the topic of immigration, regardless of who's talking about it, do you guys want to go, yeah, but, or do you want to argue, or you want to pick up the phone and smack somebody?
Of course. When we hear these things, we can't believe it, and we do want to pick up the phone. And even I like I said, I posted a video about just some of the things we saw last week, and I had some idiot say, "Wow, I want to see the facts. Where's the newspaper that this came from? Where did this information come from?" It's like, really? You want the newspaper? Who do you think gives the info to them? They're taking our info. Like, it was coming from the exact source. There was no other place to get it from. And I think a lot of them think we're fabricating this, or most of our politicians and people across this country don't want to know. They frankly don't want to know the travesties that are going on down in the southern end of our country, because that doesn't go along with with their politics. And the reality of it is, the cartel is abusing people. They're using people. They're making just as much money off of bodies as they are off of drugs right now.
So you were at the White House not too long ago. So I think I sent you a text message like you're looking good on TV or something. I don't know what I said.
Thank you.
And I'm happy that you're there, and you've got a presence in Washington D.C., but I don't think that you're in the faces explaining things to people that really need to hear them. It's almost as though you guys come into town and these Democrats and these people don't want to be part of this discussion. They run for the hills. Is that right?
Yeah, there's nowhere to be found. I on a couple different occasions, both I was at the White House, challenged the congressmen and women and senators to come down and see for themselves. 2 weeks later, we were at Calexico with the president, challenged him again.
Yeah.
And I think there's probably only been 5 congressmen or women that have come down. I'm not aware of any Democrats that have made the trip down there to truly understand what we're dealing with. And the ones who have come, their eyes have been open, even though they knew what we were dealing with. When you actually see it and you put your eyes on what the trash that's in the desert and the reality of it, it really has a different impact. And unfortunately, the majority of those politicians, like I said, it doesn't go along with what they're trying to say, so they don't want to see it.
How many cartels are you guys really dealing with? Are there 2 or 3, or are there 2 dozen, 5 dozen?
No, I don't think there's 5 dozen. I mean, it's really hard. It's not like the cartel picks up the phone and says, and we have a monthly meeting and says, "Hey, Sheriff, just so you know, there's 5 of us work in your area." That's just not what they do. So we just really don't know what we're dealing with. We anticipate that in this area where we are, 1 to 2 cartels that are bringing people and drugs into our county. That's in the desert area. Then you have the I-10 and the I-8 freeways, where maybe those drugs got through the ports and now they're transporting either drugs or money. Those, who knows, probably a few more cartels involved with that.
When you go out on a call or whatever, and you write up some kind of a report, after action report, who does that report go to?
So a lot of what we're dealing with right now, we work with our federal partners, with Border Patrol. We use we use our aviation units to assist them in what they're doing. So their after action reports come to myself and my administrative staff. Obviously, folks in Washington somewhere are getting it. It usually goes to the local station, and then from there, depending on what kind of information, it may go all the way up to Washington. But there's a lot more bureaucracy on the federal government side than there is for us.
Right.
And, we're able to share a lot of this information. And, of course, we always want, people to know that this is done we're working together on this. This isn't something we could do alone, and obviously it's something that we become a major contributor and partner to our federal partners with. So on the south end of my county is an Indian reservation, so I technically don't have any jurisdiction there. We need Border Patrol is the one that can work that area.
Wow. I get emails every day from Customs, Immigration, and Border Patrol. And, I look through them. Sometimes I take some of the successes and I post them. I'm looking at one that says ICE arrests 140 criminal aliens, blah, 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 blah. That one came in, I don't know, about an hour and a half ago. So it almost is, if I get 5 or 6 a day, it gives me the impression that there were only 5 or 6 events. You see what I'm saying? I mean, it's almost as though Immigration, Customs, and Border Patrol needs to put out a statistic every single day, because we can't comprehend the numbers, the encounters or the interactions that you guys have. So I think it's almost as though Customs and Border Patrol is cheating themselves by not saying, June the 9th, we had all of these interactions. And this happened in California, this happened in New Mexico, this happened in Arizona, this happened in Florida, this happened in, Vermont. Is that part of the bureaucracy that you're speaking of?
Yeah, and I think it goes to show how busy we are. It's much like, I'll give you an example. I do a lot every day, and I might come home at the end of the day and my wife say, what did you do today? And I probably give her the cliff notes of like 1 or 2 things, or she goes on my Instagram and looks to see one thing I posted. A lot of times you do so much that some of it does just fall through the cracks. It doesn't make it any less important, but I think they're so busy. I know for example, in Yuma County, they just have so many people coming across that border and giving up, and they're overwhelming the system. And I mean, how do you even put all that out? Look, there's always stuff we can do better, but I think it's more of the fact that there's just so much going on that it's hard to report it all.
That's kind of where I want to go next, because, there was a time we were seeing some of these raids that were going on inside the country. We went into this meatpacking plant in Iowa and we found, 200 and some odd, blah, 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 blah. They were doing those raids. All of a sudden, those have just kind of gone away. And that tells me that a lot of those assets, and you need to correct me if I'm wrong, that a lot of those assets that were doing these kinds of things inside the country have kind of been transferred down to the border because of the volume. And then because of the volume, some of the Border Patrol can't do certain things, so they're kind of dumping on law enforcement. Did I get that kind of right, or make some corrections if you need to?
I don't work for them, but I would say you're probably not on the right page on that.
Okay.
Because first of all, Customs and Border Patrol does one job. When you see people, ICE is who goes in, and they're the ones that are both housing people who've committed crimes, and ICE is also they have the units that go out and they will take people into custody who are here in the country illegally.
Okay.
There are so many people coming into the country that ICE once Border Patrol processes them and they get a court date and they're sent to Georgia or the Carolinas or wherever they're sending them, then ICE becomes responsible for those people. Okay. There are so many people claiming asylum and coming into this country and going into the court system. I just don't think that they really have the time or the manpower to do a lot of that anymore. And I think that it's not that they don't want to do that piece of their job. It's like everybody else, they're overwhelmed on what they're supposed to do too.
The RAND report just came out. RAND Corporation just came out with a report for the Department of Homeland Security. And I've had to read, it's not but maybe 500 words, but I've had to read it like 3 times because I can't comprehend. $2.3 billion the smugglers were paid or their revenue, helping migrants cross the border in 2017. 2017.
Yeah, I believe it.
2.3 billion. Now, obviously 2019 is setting all kinds of records, almost to the point where that it tells me that $2.3 billion number can double. Is that even right, Sheriff?
Probably. I mean, the cartel, the fact that they're pushing so many people through the border has got to tell the average thinking person that they're making gobs of money on it. That's why they're doing it. If Walmart was selling widgets and everybody was buying them, guess what Walmart would stock their shelves with? Widgets. And that the cartel, the fact that they're continuing to push people through, and that says to me that they are making tremendous amounts of money on it. And like I said earlier, they're making as much right now off of
people,
bodies, as they are off of drugs.
And with a lot less risk.
Their efforts. Yeah, well, and they're doubling their efforts because people are paying them to come across. They don't do a money-back guarantee. If you get caught, you get caught. But they also use those people, and this is what we see, they use them as a transportation model for their drugs into the country. So they're charging them, and they're making them carry their drugs for them. And, they're exploiting people who truly want to make a better life for themselves. They're exploiting our country. They're exploiting our empathies that we have. They know what our politics are. The cartel knows exactly the infighting and that's going on amongst our politicians, and they are exploiting that.
Sheriff, I mean, it's almost speechless here, but it wasn't but a handful of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, we were seeing the massive migration out of Syria into Greece, across the Mediterranean into Greece and Europe. And we were all horrified. And I would argue what's happening now is just as bad, and in some cases worse, than what we were seeing with the Syrian migrants. Is that overstating it?
I don't think so. I think that we are seeing something similar, if not as bad, if not worse. I'm not right on the border, and I'm not a county that has to deal with that, like maybe Yuma County or San Diego County down where Tijuana is. But it's definitely, you see these pictures of these groups of people, and it's something that we need to be cognizant of. I mean, they're putting a tremendous financial strain on our country, on these little towns, both in Mexico and on our U.S. soil, on those communities like you had mentioned in Uberti County and also in Yuma County. We're really feeling it. And that doesn't even talk about some of the health issues that may be coming across. You've got health assessments you have to do on all these people. And then what type of health concerns are we dealing with people coming across? There's so much to it that the average American just doesn't think about it. And most people want to make it about immigration. It's not. It's about human trafficking and drug trafficking into this country.
Well, that's an interesting distinction there, because in Washington, D.C., we're only speaking about immigration.
Right, because people feel bad for somebody who wants to come here and make a better life. We have a process in place for that. We do. These people are choosing not to follow it. The cartel is exploiting that and making money off of people that don't want to follow the protocol that we have in place. And this is where I always keep saying, Congress and Senate need to come up with some common sense solutions to solve the immigration piece of it, so that we can then better attack the human trafficking and drug trafficking. But right now it's not about immigration anymore. It's about human trafficking and drug trafficking. And people want to say that we don't bring people into this country. We had millions of people come into this country last year. Millions. And a lot of them tried to bypass the system and claim asylum and these types of things. And probably a small percentage of them were legit asylum seekers. We've got a broken system, and it needs to be fixed. And we're carrying the brunt of it as law enforcement right now.
So the shame really belongs on Congress here at this point. But all indications are, Sheriff, that we're not going to see anything come out of Congress until way after 2020. Is that the reality that you guys are really feeling too?
That's the reality based on what I see, just because of how polarized people are. And I think that these people have allowed their dislike for our president to skew doing what's right for this country. And he is pushing things that both President Clinton and President Obama said the exact same things, if not worse, about protecting our borders and this and that. They seem to forgot completely about that. This is not something that is new that President Trump has brought on to the forefront. He is nearly doing the same, if not the same thing as others. It's just that people don't like it because he's doing it. And we've got to get past that pettiness. We've got politicians that we've put in there that just are so petty. It's unbelievable, and it's affecting our country.
What's the morale like for Border Patrol and for law enforcement?
You know, we have a president who finally supports us. So on that end, that's great. Morale is tough in the sense that we continue to do a job, and then we're bashed for doing that job, for protecting this country by a lot of people. But there are so many supporters out there as well. The media doesn't want to show that, but when I post something online, 90% or more of the feedback I get is positive. And then you got your few people that just, if they're going to complain no matter what, and they've bought into it and they're passionate about one end of it, and they're not going to see rationale. So I can't change those people, but the majority of the people are very supportive, and Border Patrol, they're out working their butts off. Local sheriff's offices are, police departments, everybody's working hard, and that can get old and discouraging sometimes, but we have good people out there doing the job every day. We just need some support from Washington beyond our president. We need some support from our legislators, people who we've paid and sent back to Washington to do a job, and they're not doing it.
If you were to be part of a hearing for, some cockamamie congressional committee, immigration or human smuggling can fall into all kinds of, committees. What do you really want to say to them? Shame on you, or where would you go?
It is shame on you, but I think I would say, look, what's done is done. We've got to fix the problem at hand. And it's like I said earlier, it's not about immigration. It's about human trafficking and drug trafficking. We need to stop those two things from coming into this country. And we need some common sense solutions to these problems. And being able to provide a more common sense means for people to come here to this country to make a better life is a key component to that. And then that allows us, that cripples the cartel. If you can come up with something that's common sense, your immigration plan should be twofold. How can we allow people to come and make a better life for themselves here while protecting America? And how do we cripple the cartel? And when you allow the cartel to take in $2.3 billion, you are you're creating a giant that is going to be very difficult
to slay.
Yeah, and the people American public, there's $135 billion they estimate in lost tax revenue every year from people who are here in this country illegally. $135 billion. And we are complaining about a $5 billion. Our legislators were stuck on a $5 billion border security package. If that isn't petty, I don't know what it is.
Big, huge round of applause, Sheriff Lamb, Pinal County. Thanks so much for being with us. Got to have you back because I got about 200 more questions. But ladies and gentlemen, thanks for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience. And there's more coming your way on Mojo 50. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Denise Simon Experience, heard worldwide on Mojo 50 Radio. And I have the distinct pleasure of having Tom Del Beccaro with us. Kind of a texting buddy, and sometimes we argue, and that's okay too. He's the lawyer, I'm not, but he is also the author of The Divided Era. He is a Fox News contributor and a lawyer. And the owner of politicalvanguard.com. And so, thanks, Tom, for being with us. I really loved the hearing where Nadler's House Judiciary Committee had John Dean on there. One reason is there's so many people that don't even know who John Dean was. Was this 40 years ago?
Okay, that's funny. It's great to be back on. It's funny you said don't even know who John Dean was, as if he is no longer alive.
Yeah, it was at the time or is now.
I know it was a good Freudian slip right there. Well, yeah, Watergate doesn't mean much to people 50 and under.
Right.
And John Dean shouldn't matter much to anyone. He has... I think he's still on his redemption tour trying to get into heaven, I guess. Because how else do you explain his existence? He is but done nothing but after committing his own felonies and then being the man who turned on the others who committed felonies, he's spent his life being against everything Republican, as if the reason why he thought George Bush needed to be impeached was because Nixon did something wrong and they both had an R by their name. I mean, that's just the scope of his existence. And, when I heard he was going to be testifying and put on Facebook, how do you spell desperation? And the answer is John Dean.
I guess I would say that, he has an axe to grind. And he has done that by writing the books and his appearances on CNN. But what kind of struck me is I think Congressman Matt Gaetz asked him, how much money did you make from the books that you wrote? Well, I don't know. How much money is CNN paying you for all of your appearances? Well, I don't know. Well, I think basic contract law is probably, law school 101, and he may be disbarred, but, he still was a lawyer. How could you not want to answer, or how could you not answer those two questions?
Well, because he doesn't want to tell people
right.
how biased he really is, right? I mean, he has become, I'm just in general, I'm always amazed at these people that flip between the parties, and not, someone who's casually involved in politics, but someone who goes from the heights of one party and switches to another, which just tells me that you never believed in anything to begin with. You were just some ambitious person. And John Dean apparently didn't believe in anything. And, you either understand that government expands and pushes towards socialism, and that's bad, or you have no qualms about that kind of thing, and you believe in that. But to go back and forth or to flip on the Hyde Amendment just shows you that you're just a political whore, and that's all you're about. And that's my reading on John Dean. He remains a bitter old man who's a political whore. And I'm sorry to be so.
That's all right. I don't disagree. I don't disagree with that. Okay, let's go here for a second or two if we can, Tom, and that is the Mueller report.
Did he write a report? I didn't know about that.
How can lawyers from one spectrum to the other read the Mueller report, and so many people have come out with different aspects, reading the same words? I was really struck by the takeaways of, who says what about the Mueller report. Concentrate on Section B, blah, 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 blah. I think somebody else will say, well, that's not the issue. The issue is that nobody's addressing the Russian intrusion. It's all over the place. And we little people out here that are not lawyers, we're looking to lawyers for their expertise, and we're getting explanations and target points that are across the spectrum. What are we little people out here supposed to think?
Well, okay, so there's two aspects to law when it comes to prosecuting a case, meaning taking one side or another view on a set of facts. In the civil world, meaning just if you sue someone for breach of contract, which you mentioned a moment ago,
mm-hmm.
To prevail, you just need to say it was more likely than not the following occurred. More likely than not. Now, what's more likely than not? That's just, 50 plus any percent at all that it occurred. And how you prove such things is you put in evidence. And you have to put in relevant evidence. Well, what is relevant? And this is sort of the heart of the matter. What is relevant is something that tends to prove something. So if you were your hometown, whatever it is, and someone was murdered in your hometown, and your car was parked within a block of where the murder occurred, that evidence would come in because it tends to show one way or another where you were, and the fact that you were close. People would say, well, that tends to show it.
Mm-hmm.
In a breach of contract case, evidence of, or John Dean, evidence of bias is, it tends to show his bias that he's getting paid by the other side, right?
Okay.
So what you get when you look at the Mueller report, and by the way, in the criminal prosecution realm, you need more than the preponderance of the evidence. It's beyond a reasonable doubt, which means there are no doubts, in effect. And so the point being for this, to the Mueller report is, the Mueller report has a lot of facts, it has a lot of falsehoods, but it has a lot of facts. And then people read those facts and say, this tends to show, they're not saying that, but this is what they are getting at.
They're inferences.
Yes, it tends to show that he committed obstruction. There's really no one who can argue with the collusion thing who still has a brain left in him, because that ship has sailed, right?
Right.
Because there's no evidence of that. So, and then of course the whole thing is Mueller turning everything on its head and saying, if we could have said he didn't commit a crime, we would have. Which of course is the very opposite of the American system.
Mm-hmm.
Is that it is the job of government to prove a crime, not to prove innocence. And the reason why that was in American jurisprudence, and we have a Third and Fourth Amendment, Third Amendment being you can't station soldiers in someone's home, which means in modern times the government can't put a camera in your house to watch you. And the Fourth Amendment, which is probable cause, is because the English government under King George literally, and I mean literally, would just write somebody's name down in what were called writs of assistance, and if they didn't like the person, and said, okay, go investigate that human. So the crime that Mueller did was take up an American system and say, well, I can't prove his innocence. Well, I can't prove, Denise, that you didn't kill John Kennedy. You were alive, but I don't have all the facts as to where you were. So I can't prove it. So, again, to wrap up, the answer to your question is why people are pulling. Because when you put a whole set of facts together, some tend to show this, some tend to show that, but it reaches nowhere near what was needed. But Mueller didn't care about that. I said on your show and others long ago that what Mueller would do was pull a Comey, that he would literally write a report, and that report would reflect badly on Trump, even though nothing was illegal, and a pure smear job, and they would use it, the Democrats, to attack Trump, and certainly that's what's come to pass.
Let's talk about Comey here for a second. Because
he kind of disappeared lately. Did you notice that?
Yes. And so I kind of want to bring him back into the discussion. Why he has disappeared, because things are not going to go well for him. He's now well aware, I'm sure he's been told by insiders and others, that he is going to be the focus of this, and he needs to start thinking in those terms. I think so too. And so, we are overwhelmed with obstruction of justice. But Mr. Tom, as director of the FBI doesn't prosecute cases. They pick up the evidence, they hand it over to the Department of Justice, and they handle it. Okay? So why...
That was the theory before he chose to step in and tell everyone that Hillary was innocent.
And that's where I'm going. Why didn't he obstruct justice in the Hillary case? Help me, Mr. Lawyer.
He did.
Okay, so nobody's saying that.
The law is what's prosecuted and enforced, not what's on the books, right?
Yes.
If people around you are driving 10 miles above the stated speed limit, but no one ever gets pulled over, then the law isn't that per se. So the answer, it's still early in the game for these people. The wheels of justice grind slowly when it involves politics at this level. So James Comey isn't out of anybody's woods, least of all his own. And he was very stupid to be as vocal as he was. These people are inviting it on themselves. I mean, this is the Avenatti model. I mean, that guy was literally crazy because, you don't say I'm running for president in a world that demands presidents disclose their tax returns after you haven't filed tax returns for 7 years. I mean, it was going to come back to you. But that guy's nuts.
And so he comes out with the press conference, lays all this stuff out. We were pretty sure that there's going to be some kind of an indictment on Hillary, and then all of a sudden we are blindsided. So where was Loretta Lynch? Because it's really in her lap to take what Comey said and run with it. So I would argue that she obstructed justice as well. Is that overstating it?
Well, the physical answer as to where she was recall that after she met with Bill Clinton, on the tarmac, there was a understandable uproar, and she said out loud, she didn't recuse herself, but she said, we're just going to follow the lead of the FBI on this investigation. And that's essentially what she did. She just went along with anything they said. Now, that's not permissible.
Right.
In the sense of it was an abdication of her duty, except to the extent that she did which, this is relevant because if you recall all the Democrats saying that, or Kamala Harris and others saying, well, you didn't even read the evidence and you exonerated her.
Yes.
And Loretta Lynch, of course, went way beyond that. She didn't even involve herself. So but she did, the Justice Department did pass on it, saying, okay, we're going to do this, which I suppose is the legal minimum, and why it is perhaps saying that decision obstructed justice. But look, she could have been involved. The very fact that she was involved, I mean, I don't believe for a minute that Bill Clinton was talking about grandchildren.
No.
On the tarmac.
But you notice Eric Holder, who was the former AG for the Department of Justice, and all these other outside lawyers in and out of the Obama administration, none of them took the ball and ran with the whole matter of Hillary and Comey. So their silence to me is quite deafening. And yet, interestingly enough, you've got somebody like David Axelrod who is weighing in on how Biden is an idiot. You've got pundits out there that are making huge critiques about selected politics, but nobody touched, especially in Eric Holder or whoever the deputy attorney general was under Loretta Lynch. Nobody touched the fact that they dropped the whole case on the floor when it came to Hillary Clinton. That to me is remarkable.
Well, of course. So I'm not sure which angle to approach here. But the reason why they didn't pursue Hillary was, of course, because Hillary did commit a crime with respect to her emails.
Right.
The problem was, for all of them, was that Obama knowingly committed a crime as well. It is not legal for the President of the United States to use an alias email to evade the public officials are required to maintain records, or at least not thwart the ability of government to maintain records. And Obama used an alias email, which also was done in a way which risked detection because it was in an insecure environment. And so there was never going to be a prosecution of Hillary, because to prosecute Hillary would have meant to prosecute Obama, and that was never going to occur. So that was the modus operandi, the operating principle that guided everything related to Hillary.
Some of my questions.
You can make the case that by doing it in the manner which they did, they violated federal laws. You're not allowed to make a choice like that to not prosecute when the evidence is sitting there right in front of you.
Some of my questions here are really rhetorical, but I'm setting it up to ask this question. You can't indict a sitting president. Obama is no longer a sitting president. So where's the case?
What you should do, but it's required, is not that you indict him, but that you preserve the evidence involved, and then after he leaves office, you do something about it.
Yes.
They did not do that. How do we know that? We now know that there's 4 witnesses for which they interviewed, for which there's no records. They didn't even keep notes. They didn't put Hillary under oath.
We're told that. I'm not believing all of that. We're just told that.
No, I tell you why I believe it.
Was that part of the bargain?
Well, look, I don't know how much more extraordinary it can be than to focus on the fact that during the middle of an investigation, the Justice Department allowed the destruction of evidence, that being the computers of Hillary's associate.
Right.
Never in my life have I heard of destroying evidence in the middle of an investigation. I've never heard of destroying. You keep evidence for a certain period of time. You have to keep it through the appeal period in case the case needs to be redone. And yet, it was destroyed pursuant to an agreement, and then her lawyer, Cheryl Mills, got to sit in when Hillary was being interviewed, even though Cheryl Mills had lied to the FBI. I mean, so the level of, so if they're willing to do that, how are they not willing to do the other step you and I just talked about?
Yes.
He knows.
And so the orchestration of all things Hillary, I mean, going all the way back to, the time of the Clinton White House, and you bring it forward, it's like these two are the Teflon people because they're pulling the levers of interesting legal power in Washington, D.C. And we have to kind of skip over a big, huge event because the next scandal that we really saw by the Democrats, and I would also include, Dianne Feinstein and some others, was the Kavanaugh orchestration. Okay, well, we went through that one. That one was big. I mean, we had protests in the halls of Congress. We had them outside the Supreme Court, but, all these places. But now we're having to jump back to an event that happened prior to that, and that was the orchestration of Perkins Coie and Mark Elias and Hillary Clinton and, all of these other people in the whole dossier thing, of which we're now learning about. And I wrote about the second and the third dossier. The second dossier is finally coming to the surface, courtesy of Daily Caller's Chuck Ross investigation, that we're bringing back to the surface Cody Shearer and Sidney Blumenthal, which will lead to John Brennan. So I guess the bigger scope of all of this is, Tom, the list of actors in this whole thing is so broad and so deep. I don't know if we can ever begin to list them all unless it goes into an HBO 8-part series. Do you?
No, I don't know that at any one moment there was sort of like a central intelligence apparatus running it all, but and tying it all together. But the magnitude of what they were doing, it can't be understated. I mean,
yes.
It does make Watergate look like child's play.
Yes.
When we last spoke, one of the more important things that came out in my mind, so that it gives meaning to what was going on, was the recent Carter Page interview. And the recent Carter Page interview said that just as this whole thing was going to start warming up, Stephen Halpern, he's of course the British gentleman who contacted Papadopoulos and contacted Carter Page. Carter Page said that, now, remembering that Carter Page had been affiliated with, used by the CIA over the years, and in fact helped them prosecute someone. They knew who Carter Page was at every minute.
Yep.
They knew what he had been doing. They had, and the fact that they got FISA warrants against him but never charged him tells you that he was never guilty of anything at all, at any time, right? So the fact that Carter Page, that Stephen Halpern, right before the FISA applications were to come to pass, meaning they applied for them, they had Halpern increased his communications
right
with Page. That tends to show you that, in fact, this, how big a setup this was.
Yes, and we're going back to your evidence thing.
Yeah, there's no reason for anyone to be talking to Carter Page at that moment. There's nothing about him that was going to be revealing. But what they wanted to do was freshen the evidence, so to speak, so that they could make the claim to the court that this is a recent thing, so therefore it's legitimate, because honestly, they had stale news related to Carter Page. And so they had to freshen it up. That's what was going on there. And that just tells you how ridiculous, well, not ridiculous, how their criminal intent, because they were unquestionably setting people up for this whole thing. This was a setup. And look, Dick David Hansen who is of some renown, certainly more than me, although totally undeserved. No, I'm kidding. Of more renown with me, has no trouble saying that this was a coup attempt, and so does Joe DeGenova.
Yeah, I call it nullification, but yeah.
Yeah, well,
of his entire presidency.
Yeah. They committed crimes to do it, though. That's the problem.
Well, that's right. Well, the hearing yesterday, I think with the 4 lawyers on the panel, one being disbarred, John Dean, gave the Democrats a new script to use going into the general election of 2020. The script for the Republicans against the Democrats, I think, is still being written, and a lot of pressure is on AG Barr and lawyer John Durham. So that script is still being written. But Mr. Tom Del Beccaro, thanks for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience. And ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way on the Denise Simon Experience right here on Mojo 50 Radio. So stay with us.
The truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Suppress, Mike Charlie, 435, 9er 21, grid to mark, Mike Charlie, 47 tree, 9er, 89er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds HEPT, gas TOT 53.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Very happy that you could stay along for the ride as we are heard worldwide on Mojo 50. We keep hearing this cockamamie thing about tax the rich. We're going to pay for this by taxing the rich. I have a plan. We're going to tax the rich. We're going to pay for blah, 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 blah. So, I tapped Adam Michel on the shoulder, and he agreed to be with us. He's the tax expert over at the Heritage Foundation, and I think he ought to be right about now the busiest man in Washington, D.C. In fact, I think for every place these Democrat candidates are showing up while they're campaigning, you ought to be following them, Mr. Adam. But welcome to the Denise Simon Experience.
Thanks for having me on.
I need you. We do. We need you to be sitting in the audience and raising your hand every time. I have a plan that's going to pay for, Medicare for all. I have a plan that's going to satisfy, all the college debt. You really, I want to see you do that, and I'll follow you. Get a GoPro camera, and we'll put it on TV.
Yeah, I think Elizabeth Warren has claimed that her wealth tax is going to pay for about 4 or 5 distinct policy proposals, all of which are more expensive than the tax than the amount of money the tax will raise. But that's the fundamental problem: is if you combine all of the taxes on the so-called rich that have been proposed out there, they can't even cover our deficit that we're going to have in 2029 in 10 years, let alone the $50 trillion of spending that's being proposed right now by the progressive left. And that leaves us with having to tax middle-class Americans to pay for all of this, and that's what they're not talking about.
If I use the word delusional, not only for these candidates and the non-candidate Democrats, but even those that are sitting in the audience listening to them making their speeches, are both sides over there on taxing the rich delusional, or is this an illusion, or where are we, Adam?
Yeah, I don't think it's too far off the mark to say they're delusional. It's just simply mathematically impossible to tax the rich enough to pay for all of the spending programs that you've heard being proposed. The conservative estimates of what's being proposed, as I said, is $50 trillion over 10 years. If we were to confiscate every dollar earned from people earning over something like $200,000 a year, we still couldn't cover the cost of what's being proposed. And that's assuming that those folks will continue working at the levels they're working now, which is an incredible assumption to make. So it really is a fictitious world that's being talked about right now.
Are you keeping a list? I mean, you have to have a yellow pad, and at the top it's got to have somebody's name. And the proposals that they're saying, we're going to pay for free college, Medicare for all. We could just kind of go down the line here. Are you keeping some kind of a list and a tally on what these things cost?
Yeah, we try to. I have an intern that helps me do that as well, and we're keeping track of both of their spending and all the new tax increases that various folks are proposing. And when you combine the two, it amounts to a pretty scary future.
And have you noticed a pattern in this tally, this list that you got the interns helping you work on? Have you noticed a pattern that it is all domesticated social justice kind of issues?
Yeah, it's on both the tax side and the spending side.
Yeah.
It's almost exclusively on the spending side. Give everyone, get the government more involved in every part of your life. Whether that's taking over healthcare or taking over education, and on the tax side, it's how do we take from those who are most successful and then give negative taxes, increasing things like the EITC to folks that are not as being as productive and simply have a different mentality about how a productive economy should work.
Is there one is there one particular item that's bothering you most? I mean, is it student loan forgiveness? Is it single payer health or healthcare? I mean, is there jobs guarantee? I mean, is there one of these that's really the scariest for you?
You know, they're all pretty scary. You're asking a really hard question, but I think I'm by no means an expert in healthcare policy, but I think those are some of the more scary proposals. I mean, I'm in my 30s. I don't think someone in my generation has ever seen a true free market in healthcare. All we've known is government managed healthcare. And a lot of the problems in education as well are problems that are caused by government intervention. But it's being messaged as all the problems are problems with the free market. And that's the fundamental, the sort of underlying premise is false in all of these advocates for getting government more involved. Is they're almost always trying to solve problems that are government created in the first place.
What are the consequences here of really where we are today? And would those consequences be wider and deeper and more numerous if all of these plans and whatnot happen? In other words, do we have some kind of when we listen to their words, they're speaking to class warfare, right?
Yeah, it's a politics of envy. It's someone else has something, someone has something else, and I something else that I don't have, and I want it, and I'm going to charge the government to fix that perceived problem, and that's really what it all comes down to is how do we redistribute resources so that everyone is equally poor rather than everyone having economic mobility and opportunity.
And so it's kind of, again, I kind of go back to the delusion/illusion that these candidates and really the non-candidate Democrats are really speaking to leveling out inequality, but nobody's really defining what that inequality is except shame on those wealthy people, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's sort of a rhetorically nice point to make, but there's no facts or there's no solid policy proposals that would actually get at the problems that they're talking about. I mean, you look at we talk about income inequality and paying for all of these programs by taxing the rich. If you actually look at countries that have these types of programs, you look at all across Europe, they don't tax the wealthy to pay for these programs. They tax middle and lower income Europeans. Someone making 2/3 of the average wage across Europe, it's about $37,000 a year in the U.S., gets taxed at marginal tax rates of 50%, and they pay a 20% sales tax on top of that. It really is. Big government costs a lot of money, and it doesn't just cost a lot of money to rich people. The average Americans will have to pay for the progressive agenda.
Okay, Mr. Taxman, you're the expert. The tax policy that we have is really it's a penalty tax. In other words, you do well, you succeed, and you're penalized for that. Is that overstating really what the tax doctrine is?
No, I think that's exactly right. Both on the labor side, the more you work, the higher your tax bracket, and then also on the investment side, the more productive your investments are, the better your business does. You also start getting taxed at higher rates. And so it creates that disincentive for more investment. It creates a disincentive for more work and more productive work. You look at countries across Europe, they work shorter weeks, they take longer vacations, and that's not because they're lazier than Americans or because they want to do that. They know if they work that additional hour, the government's going to take 50 cents of every additional dollar they make. That's that marginal 50% tax rate. And so you sort of look to Europe and say, how great would that be? But all of that is because government policy is forcing people into that world. And frankly, I would much prefer to be in a world where I get to keep more of the money I earn.
Does anybody speak to the financial benevolence of the wealthy and the stuff that the wealthy does with their money to give back? I mean, we could look at Bill Gates. You know, he's got more money than anybody, but he's also giving it away, isn't he?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. Especially in the United States, where the government, thankfully, isn't as omnipresent as it is in a lot of other places, developed countries around the world. There is a culture of charity and giving, and a lot of that it comes from folks who have done very well. It also folks that aren't doing as well also give a lot in the United States. And you don't see that trend in a lot of other countries. And I think a big part of it is when government gets really big, it crowds out that private philanthropy. When the government comes into your life and it is managing your health care and your education, and you sort of go down the list, there's no longer the need for your local church or your local civil society organization. And that's the real sort of unseen cost of government being more and more involved in our lives.
You must have been reading my mind, because that's really where I was going. I mean, there was a time that people took care of each other at the community level, and that's really not so much anymore. Not only were they maybe donating $10 here, but they would foster friendships and relationships by donating some food or sewing or cutting the grass or, helping them farm or whatever it may be. And now those relationships are a dying thing, such that, well, the government will step in because we got this grant, we got this program, we got Section 8 housing, we got blah, blah, all these other things. Do we... I mean, there's a whole nother kind of consequence here that really isn't being discussed, and I think that kind of speaks to going back to even the class warfare. Would that be right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the real danger of our large and growing debt and our huge deficit and the size of the government in general is yes, that they're taking a lot of our money and spending inefficiently. But I think it's even more worrying is all of those things that the money is going to. How is that grant that is going to the local organization that's trying to take care of your homeless changing their incentives? If the government says the grant is for this, they're going to. That local organization is going to conform to whatever the federal standards are, and that removes the ability of local organizations to tailor to the needs of the community. Instead, they're tailoring their services to the desires of bureaucrats in Washington, and that removing the local control and the local community that in our history has supported such a vibrant country. And in exporting it to bureaucrats in Washington really undermines more of our community and civil society than I think a lot of people realize.
That whole part of this argument just never gets, part of the conversation, is it? I mean, it's really kind of remarkable.
It is, I think, especially as folks who appreciate smaller government and free markets. We get fixated on the things that are easy to measure. I can say that we have a $22 trillion debt and that the deficit is going to be over $1 trillion next year. And those are easy statistics to rattle off, but it's more difficult to really talk about what does that $22 trillion debt mean to my everyday life. And those are much more subtle changes, but they have bigger and more real impacts over time that are very qualitative. It's hard to quantify them, and so I think the more we talk about these sort of softer issues, the more I think it is more important to talk about these softer issues because that's where the rubber meets the road and how the government is actually making it harder for us to live our best life.
I don't know that you could put a value on local community relationships, churches, Boy Scouts, all of these organizations, if they continued to help out each other like they once did in the 20s and 30s and 40s, where we are today, if we put that into current dollars, those are cheap dollars that you're not having to pay some kind of interest in debt payments on the debt, correct?
Yeah, I agree. It is very hard to quantify.
You wouldn't be able to, but it would have to be huge.
It would, yeah. The loss of those local institutions is quite, or at least the degradation of those institutions is really tremendous, and I think it's showing up in a lot of the sort of social problems that we're seeing today, whether that be the opioid crisis, or I mean, there's obviously lots of compounding factors, but I think one of them is this loss of community, looking to the federal government or the state government as the person that's going to fix these problems, rather than communities coming together and that being the first line of defense.
If you had Bernie Sanders in front of you today, what would be the 3 main points you would want to shoot him with a water pistol with?
The thing about like the Bernie Sanders of the world is I think they truly believe that they're on a mission to better society, and so I think it's important to sit those folks down and explain our worldview. And it's less than the three quick points that you can hit them over the head with, but
sure.
It's starting a conversation about how important markets are, and what it looks like in Europe for folks to be taxed at 50% rates, and how much. Me personally, I value a free market in healthcare and education, and start the conversation there.
I don't think that the audience that sits before a speech that Bernie Sanders is giving, or Kamala Harris is giving, or Kirsten Gillibrand is giving, that they understand debt, interest, payment, all those kinds of things. It's kind of like they don't really have a concept, because we have all of these other words that the Democrats have been throwing in. Social justice. We want to get rid of, student loan forgiveness, and all these other kinds of social justice programs. It's just they're playing to emotions here, are they not?
They are. They are 100% playing to emotions, and I think that's why it's important to look at places that have implemented the policies that they're putting out, and that we don't need to go as extreme as Venezuela or other sort of truly
Los Angeles
places. Yeah, you can point to Los Angeles, you can point to Europe and say, if the world you want to implement is the one that you're claiming, free healthcare, free college, then talk about the real ways we're going to pay for it. Talk about the how these things are actually implemented. Don't just sell us with a quick line on we're going to raise taxes on the rich, because that's just simply not the way to get there. They're putting forward an impractical policy agenda.
So, given really where these Democrat candidates are, if we just shut down the military, shut down the Pentagon for 2 years, sent everybody home, didn't pay anything, it still couldn't pay for their programs, could it?
No, the military is certainly not the piece of the budget that is eating into any of the priorities we have. It really comes down to the biggest pieces of our budget are the social spending programs we already have. It's Medicare, Medicaid, other healthcare entitlements, Social Security. These are the things that are growing at a rate that is faster than the economy. These are the programs that are on an unsustainable path already and will bankrupt us in the near future. And so it's those programs that they want to expand on that are already the problem in our budget.
What frustrates you most in your day-to-day job on all of this?
I think it comes back to the inability to have even a conversation about all of these big programs with all the facts in front of us. We can talk about wanting to spend $32 trillion on Medicare for all, but we also need to have a conversation about how to pay for it at the exact same time. We can't separate those of we're just going to deficit spend because we want to give people things and we'll worry about it later. I think putting all the options on the table in front of folks, I think Americans will make the right decision. But when you talk about all the goodies you're going to get and never talk about how we're going to pay for it, you get a very distorted view of reality.
The other piece part of all of this is not just a formal, item within tax policy or tax law, but it's also we have found regulations, and regulations end up costing big money too. And so the Trump administration, I think, was doing, if you want to put in one regulation, you got to take out 3. And so that was a cool thing. And we really applied some dollars and cents to these ridiculous regulations that I would say augment a distorted tax law, tax policy?
So you're right. The administration is doing tremendous work in not only rolling back previous regulations, but just simply stopping new regulations has a tremendous positive impact on business optimism and the ability for Americans to live their lives and be more productive. And that, I think it's the deregulatory agenda paired with the tax cuts that we got in 2017 that are responsible for all of the good economic news we're seeing today. I mean, if you look at like wage data, for instance, low income and non-supervisory workers their wages are growing at twice the rate of high-income workers. Disenfranchised populations, workers with disabilities, go down the different categories of minorities. All of them, unemployment is at historic lows, and so these are the benefits that come with a productive and well-functioning economy, and those are, I think, a lot of those benefits can be attributed to removing the regulatory burden that has been accumulating over, for
ever
many years. Yes.
Well, at least maybe we don't have to hear the Warren Buffett secretary story anymore. I'm really kind of tired of that one, and that seems to be the single go-to story that we always hear, yet there aren't any others. But there was another component to the Warren Buffett story, and that is his, contributions that he makes, his charity agenda that he does and so forth, and nobody really speaks about that one. But, Adam, we appreciate this conversation. It's one that we need some real help with, so we can go stand there and with our hands on our hips and stomp our feet when we hear what these Democrats are saying to us and what's coming out of the House. But Adam, Michel with the Heritage Foundation, thanks so much for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience. And ladies and gentlemen, please stay with us because there's more coming your way. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. We're glad you're along for the ride. And thanks to Mojo 50 for broadcasting the Denise Simon Experience worldwide. The big topic, well, at least one of them, there's so many, we're just being overwhelmed, is social media and the censorship, and shame on Facebook and shame on YouTube and blah, 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 blah. So now we have the Department of Justice investigating social media platforms. We've got the House of Representatives that have assigned it to a committee, and everybody's trying to figure out what to do. So what do? Well, I call on my buddy, Daniel Ortner, Pacific Legal Foundation, because he and I are tracking the same way here. He wrote a piece on keep the government out of it. But welcome, Daniel.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Okay, look. There are some moving parts to this, I gotta say. I don't want government in this business. However, I would argue, because poking around, waiting for you, I come across this law, not even sure what it's called. Wait a minute. It's a 47 U.S. Code 230, protection for private blocking and screening offensive material.
Yeah.
Are you? What is that?
Yeah, so that's the Communications Decency Act. So
that's it.
Basically,
that's it.
So basically what you're talking about is normal publishers, like a newspaper publisher, if they publish an article that defames someone, let's say, the newspaper can be liable for the defamation that's published. But Congress passed a law that says social media companies, if they let people publish on their platform, they're not responsible if someone publishes something defamatory. So if you go on Facebook and defame someone, you can be liable for your own speech, but Facebook is not going to be sued for defamation for just creating the space where you can air your opinions. That's really the foundation of the modern internet. And that's really what's led to the social media revolution, is that social media companies can provide a space where people can get together, they can share ideas, they can deliberate, they can debate freely, and it's been an amazing benefit to society and really changed the way that we communicate and share information. So there's been a call from some, and really I've been disappointed by some, like Senator Ted Cruz, who I admire greatly on a lot of issues, but he's been calling to say, well, Facebook and others, if they're engaging in any kind of control of speech, so if they're getting rid of, let's say, white supremacist speech or pro-terrorist speech, if they do any editorial control, they should be liable for what's on their platform. And I think that's just misguided. It's not a First Amendment violation if the government did so, because the government can set the terms of liability, but it's really a big mistake. It would undermine the foundations of the internet as we know it. And I don't want to have government stepping in and messing with something that's working remarkably well, ultimately.
I absolutely agree with that. I think, and I'm with you on Ted Cruz, but something tells me, however, that social media is become its own police to the detriment of some incomes that people were getting because of what they do on social media. Perhaps that's where he was going. Is it, you think?
Yeah, I mean, people can, Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and all the other social media companies are private companies. They're not government entities, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't criticize them. I mean, they do say we are creating a space for free speech and free exchange of ideas. When they don't live up to those ideas, people are totally allowed to call them out on it. They can boycott. They can go off those channels and create their own social media platforms. That happened last year when YouTube began demonetizing gun-related videos. People created a separate site just for gun videos and gun-related content off of YouTube. So absolutely, you can. I mean, they're absolutely not free from criticism. YouTube, Facebook, we shouldn't pretend that they're not actually run by people that have particular ideological viewpoints. They might be negatively screening conservative content. That can all be true, but the response is not government control. The response is let the free market work. The people say, well, they're monopolies, but really the internet is a free market. Companies come and go. If you think about MySpace was once the dominant social media platform. People said it was invincible, and it really wasn't, because there is a marketplace. People can start up their own company. The barrier for entry is very low, and people can leave very easily. There's no reason you can't leave Facebook and delete your account if you want to. And so the calls for censorship are just unnecessary and really harmful.
Yeah, I don't want government doesn't do anything well. That's the first thing I really need to say in all this. Do you think, however, this communications decency doctrine needs to be re-looked at? Does it need to be cleaned up? Because something tells me it almost has not kept up with the models of communications that we're using today.
No, I don't think so. I think you look at what Facebook is doing. I mean, they are, let's say Facebook or YouTube, they are restricting certain types of content, but they're not engaged in the kind of editorial control that you have like a newspaper, an editorial board in a newspaper where every word is being edited by an editor. Everything that's out there is, being vetted by the people involved in the newspaper, and we shouldn't expect and want Facebook to do that. That's why social media has been so transformative. Is they're not generally micromanaging content. They're letting anyone who wants to, with a keyboard and a connection, go and publish content. So I think that should, that if we move away from what the Communications Decency Act establishes, it's going to make Facebook less likely to create space for everyone's viewpoint. It's going to either go to the extreme of censoring content, or the other extreme of just letting anyone who wants to publish on Facebook publish anything. And I don't think that we should say Facebook has to allow neo-Nazi propaganda or white supremacist speech on their platform. They're private. They can exclude whatever speech they don't want to have on there, and they should be allowed to do that. In fact, the First Amendment protects their right to exclude speech they disagree with.
All right. Now, let me throw some sand in the gears. You're the lawyer, so you need to go put me in a corner if I need to go sit over in the corner and be quiet. And it would go like this. Given that the internet has a platform that gives Facebook a platform, that gives Google a platform, and YouTube and all the rest of these, the internet itself has regulations. So that's a stipulation I'm going to just set aside there for a second. Now we have television. And television is also governed by the Federal Communications Commission, and it is a platform that's, I would argue, highly regulated. So we've got radio as a platform, we've got television as a platform, we've got the internet as a platform. Where's the distinctions?
Well, I mean, I think you just made a really good case why we should deregulate radio and television. There's no reason that the government needs to be micromanaging what's on the radio or on television in the age when you can, on your iPhone, on your phone, go to download a million different podcasts or listen to every radio show under the sun. There's no reason why the airwaves or television need to be so highly regulated as they are. And that's definitely not a reason for the government to step in and regulate social media or regulate the internet. The internet has been very largely deregulated, and I think it's led to really transformed the way we do business, the way we shop, the way we communicate with each other. And I think, when the government begins to step in, there are going to be unintended consequences, and it's going to harm what has been created or come about through the market.
All right, more sand in the gears, and that is the fairness doctrine. Does that need to be repealed then?
Well, there is no fairness doctrine currently. The fairness doctrine is gone, and was eliminated in the 90s, and that was really necessary and led to conservative talk radio as a force. It's led to revolutions in communication. I think absolutely we don't want the government stepping in and saying you have to give equal time, you have to let express viewpoints equally. The government is not the one who should be policing content. We should let people create the content they want and compete with each other. You have rival podcasts, rival websites. That's the way that the marketplace of ideas should work.
We are still, though, I call into a radio show virtually every single morning at 6:30 in the morning, and they're still operating under a fairness doctrine. Why is that?
And I think there's, there is absolutely outdated regulations that the FCC has had. At one point, maybe they had a better case that there was some kind of a monopoly. There's a limited number of airwaves, I suppose, or a limited number of communication channels for television. That's just not the case anymore. And so I think it's really outdated. You have digital, you have satellite for television. You have, you can download podcasts. You can listen to radio shows in hundreds of different ways now.
Sure. And
so there's no need, I think, for government oversight. It's based on an outdated model of scarcity, that there's a limited number of channels, and therefore we need to have fairness equalize them. And that's just not the case.
All right. So if the abuses, and we can call them abuses out here, because, there are a lot of people that are just getting penalized for using certain platforms in the search world with search engines. in the YouTube world and in Twitter world and so forth and so on. I mean, people are getting punished for, certain things that they post.
Yeah.
So as a consequence, I mean, sometimes they're like permanently banned. Sometimes they just kind of go, you're suspended and you're going to go,
right.
Sit in jail for 30 days. Should those consequences have some kind of consequence to those that render the consequence?
I mean, I don't think they should have any government consequences. The First Amendment doesn't apply to private companies, and the government, interfering is the one doing it would be violating the First Amendment. The private companies have their own First Amendment rights to associate or not associate, with views that they want to associate with. I do think we should be concerned with the kind of knee-jerk desire to censor. That's a broader concern. It's not a government concern. It's not a First Amendment concern, but it's one that, as people who care about free speech, who care about ideas being allowed to be expressed, we should be concerned. I don't think we should, not voice our concern when people are getting censored or cut off of platforms. But the answer is not government. Government does not have a role in regulating. And so I think we can be concerned and speak out, and maybe, if the case is bad enough, move away from YouTube or Facebook and just go to alternative platforms, or just pressure Facebook, that they care about their bottom line. So if we conservatives mobilize and say, we're not going to use you, we're not going to click on ads, we're not going to make you money if you don't respect free speech or respect the speech of those on your platform, then they'll listen to that. And you can work a grassroots movement to do that, but you can't resort to the government and get the government to censor, to punish them for using their own First Amendment rights to not associate with ideas they don't want to associate with.
So when the Department of Justice and, the House something committee is doing some kind of review on social media, I think they're doing this in response to social media doing their own censoring, which is subjective in many cases. It certainly appears to be so in the case of Hugh Hewitt. All right. But having said that, I think some of the other abuses that are necessarily being examined is the far reach and abuse of the data that social media collects from us, without the user knowingly approving, correct?
Sure. I mean, ultimately, that's not. I think that's a matter of contract between the user and the company. We maybe should be more zealous to say, you can't use our data in a certain fashion. Facebook's been very responsive in response to the Cambridge Analytica scandal and others, to say we're going to not abuse data the way we're abusing it. I don't know that there's a real role for government. It's again, private companies can collect data on users. You sign up for it. Assuming you agree to the terms of service and you say it's okay to collect my data in this fashion. Maybe we can push for maybe there should be more transparency. But generally, if you know what you're getting, you know what you're signing up for. I don't think there's a role for government to stop that. People ultimately choose what data they want to get out there, and you're in control. If you agree to sign up for Facebook, then you're giving up certain data about yourself.
I've said this a couple of times. I'd like to, hear a lawyer's perspective. For instance, we've got the National Rifle Association that works diligently to protect the Second Amendment. It almost seems as though there's nobody outside of Pacific Legal Foundation that's protecting the First. I almost feel, we got this poor Colorado baker again that's facing another lawsuit. For the exact same reason. So, you have some
great organizations. Pacific Legal Foundation is doing a lot of work. I think you have ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom, in the religious sphere. You have the Beckett Fund for religious speech in particular. You have Institute for Justice. You have other groups. There are a lot of great groups, and even occasionally the ACLU will do something pro free speech. And even though they've kind of become a shell of what they used to be, sometimes they'll they'll stand up and defend individual liberty when they should be. But I think there's a your point really is that there's a cultural loss about appreciation for free speech.
Yes.
Once both the left and the right understood that free speech means you need to allow people you disagree with to speak, and you defend the right of those even that you find vile to speak their mind, and the way to respond is with counter speech, not with censorship. And we've lost that because people are so up in arms, they're so offended, and they believe that if I hear offensive speech, it's an act of violence against my person, and I can't allow that. I can't hear these things that I disagree with, and so there's a real push to censor. And so I think we need to fight back generally and say, remind people that the remedy to speech you disagree with is more speech, counter speech. Speak truth, respond, and ultimately the idea of the marketplace is good ideas and true ideas win out if there's reason, like free and open debate.
All right, so here's some more sand in the gears, Mr. Lawyer Man, and it goes. When I decide that I want to hold a rally in Tulsa or in Washington, D.C., I have got to go do a whole bunch of hoop jumping and get a permit, likely get liability insurance. I got to pay for approval and then wait for approval. So it's almost as though that into itself is an infringement on the First Amendment. True or false?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Supreme Court has said that reasonable permitting requirements are allowed. So if it's a large demonstration, you can allow pre-registration and some reasonable fees. But there's often litigation over that, and the governments cannot ban spontaneous speech. So if you're going to just you're allowed to spontaneously go on a street corner and preach and speak your mind, and the government cannot restrict that. And if they do restrict, have permitting requirements. It has to be neutral, it has to apply to everyone fairly. It can't be just to punish people for speech. This is an issue on college campuses, right, where they have security fees, and they're charging controversial speakers a lot more in security fees so that the groups can't afford to bring people to speak on campus. It's a serious issue because the government, the government can recoup some of the cost of permit approval or maybe security, but it can't use that as a way to punish people for speaking or for sharing controversial ideas.
And yet a private company can. So
absolutely,
wait.
Property. Yeah, sorry.
I know where you're going. Hold on here. I just get to play devil's advocate.
Sure,
okay.
No problem.
So why is there not an association / industry watchdog? Maybe there is. That is really looking at the truth and consequences of what social media is doing and not doing, so they are forced to almost self-regulate, or the associations themselves penalize, irrespective of the FCC and government and all that stuff.
I don't know why there aren't ones now. I mean, I think what's dangerous, you see Facebook recently called for kind of almost an establishment of a government watchdog to establish.
Yeah, they did.
Speech, and it's kind of scary. I mean,
they were agreeable to it.
Well, when you see someone who's like a dominant player like Facebook in a market calling for their own restrictions, that's ultimately going to help them because it's going to keep competitors out. It's going to keep alternatives that want to allow speech that Facebook doesn't allow out of the marketplace. So you got to be a little skeptical when someone like Facebook is saying, well, oh gee, please regulate us. Really, it's likely that regulation is going to ultimately benefit it and stop competition. What we have now is a marketplace, and if you have a government step in and set standards and say, well, you can't have a platform if you allow neo-Nazi speech or you allow Holocaust denial or whatever they want to say is hate speech, then you're going to lose out on competition. And that's going to benefit Facebook. It's going to benefit Twitter. It's going to benefit the dominant players in the market. So it's not going to create more competition. So whenever you have companies wanting regulation on themselves, these dominant parties, you've got to be skeptical of what they're doing. Their motives are not pure. They want to increase their market share and cement their position as the dominant leaders in social media.
Have you looked at the European laws and how Google is being fined, here and there and everywhere for?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it's really some of it's pretty outrageous. Europe with regard to speech is very, very, very censorious. Anything that's hateful, anything that offends people's character or religious beliefs, they're very, very quick to censor. And so it's really dangerous. It's really hard for companies like Google and Facebook to operate there. And I think that's another reason maybe Facebook's calling for restrictions in the U.S. because here they're free and there they're not, and so they're in a little bit of a difficult situation when you have like a global exchange of ideas.
Do you believe that is some of the stimulation of what, or the motivation of why the House ABC committee is reviewing social media here in the United States, that they're taking some kind of lesson from certain laws of the European Union?
Well, I mean, I hope not, but it's certainly possible. I mean, it is, it's a complex area of law. Like, I think Congress reevaluating and looking at the laws makes sense. I just hope that they won't propose anything that interferes with the really remarkable marketplace that's been created through social media and through the free market. You don't want, we don't know the consequences when you regulate. People always think they know what's going to happen, and there always are unintended consequences. And that's something that when you have something as successful and as helpful as social media has been, I don't think you want to risk government bureaucrats getting in the way and censoring or regulating speech.
If you were invited into a confab, Mr. Daniel Ortner, with, a couple of, a senator and a congressperson and Daniel Ortner, and you were sitting in a conference room with Jack over at Facebook and and Google, and what message would you want to impart that you think a senator or a congressperson wouldn't back to those tech companies?
I think part of the problem is the government, people in Congress, they're always looking for government solutions to everything. Mm-hmm. And they're thinking, what can we do? There's a problem. We have to regulate. We have to legislate. We have to do something about it. And I think one thing that we should be asking is why? Why do we need government to step in? There are problems. Social media companies are not perfect. There's some bias involved. But by and large, the internet is remarkable. It's been remarkable success for freedom of ideas, for freedom of expression.
Products.
What I would say is, step out. There's something that's working pretty well here, and there are some problems, but the solution should not be the government interfering. You should ask why. Why should the government get involved? Is what's happening really bad enough that you need government involvement? Is there really a problem, or are you just looking for a solution to a problem that doesn't exist that you're going to create a problem?
Are we using the right term to describe Facebook and Twitter and all the rest of them, MeWe's and whatnot? Are we using the right platform by calling them social media, or is it just media?
So, I mean, they are media companies. I think what makes them social media is that they're about engagement between users. I think that would be what would make what my understanding of the social media is. You have engagement in a higher level than you would in a print newspaper. You have people back and forth engaging and tweeting and retweeting or liking or sub posting or whatever form of expression is on the platform. You have engagement and
click
dialogue.
Here, click here, click this.
Yeah.
So media is its own industry. In other words, if you're, you can get a degree in journalism, and then, if you want to go be a reporter, I mean, you got to go get press credentials and you got to go through all these hoops and whatnot. Should social media go through that same kind of scrutiny as being part of a media industry?
Well, I mean, the media, there isn't just one thing that's the media. You have established newspapers and websites and magazines, but you also have just journalists. Just now the internet has made it so anyone can start a blog, and that's kind of the idea of the media. And that really goes back in some ways to the founders. In the founding era, you had pop-up presses. People could start their own presses and publish broadsides and pamphlets and publish information out there. So I think that you don't need more regulation. You don't need licensing requirements. You need the scrutiny can come from us, the people, and also from other rivals. If a company missteps, you bet that those that are rivals from the market share are going to call it out. but you don't need the government to step in and regulate something when, the whole benefit of social media and the internet is you reduce barriers of entry. Anyone with a computer can post something that can be read across the world. That's really the amazing thing about social media and about the internet. You don't need government to step in and regulate that.
It's not that I'm not on your side, because I am. I'm trying to ask the questions that my listeners would go, yeah, but. So I'm trying to think of the yeah, but questions. Well, the only thing that concerns me is the whole defamation lawsuits deal. I think that's probably the only consequence on both sides when it comes to social media. Would that be right?
You mean so defamation lawsuit would be if I am on my Facebook account and I post something, I say something about Denise Simon is an awful person, and go and defame you, then you could sue me and you would win, but you wouldn't be able to sue Facebook because Facebook just provided a platform where I could publish what I wanted. So,
okay.
and that's that Communications Decency Act. That's what that allows, and I think that's a good thing because otherwise Facebook wouldn't provide that platform. I couldn't publish what I want to. They would have to pre-approve things that I say or do, and so that protection is I think vital. Otherwise, you wouldn't have social media. The very idea of social media is it's not top down. It's not the company dictating. These are all the ideas we want to have published. There's a freedom there, and so but social media, they shouldn't be required because of that to allow every idea possible to be there. They should be able to exercise some control and say, well, there's standards we set that we don't allow things like neo-Nazi propaganda or white supremacist speech. That should be the case. They should be allowed to at least exercise some control. Just because you allow most speech doesn't mean you have to allow all speech, and you still shouldn't be liable for the things that people on your platform say.
We're not through with this conversation, are we? Because there's so many moving parts to all of this, and it'll be fascinating to see, what happens in, these antitrust investigations and whatnot, and really where the Department of Justice goes or where Congress decides that they want to go.
That's another piece of it. Antitrust. It's this idea that they're a monopoly. I take maybe a very narrow view of what should be a monopoly, what should be regulated.
Yeah.
And it's really, does it harm consumers ultimately, or is it pro-consumer? If you're fixing prices, if you're taking competitors out of the marketplace, then that's antitrust. That's anti-competitive. But just because you're a large company, it doesn't mean you're actually harming people. It doesn't mean you're actually causing an antitrust injury to anybody. Facebook is large because they offer good services and people want to use their platform, but it's not a monopoly that needs to be broken up. That argument just doesn't make sense. They're not doing the kinds of anti-competitive things that monopolies do. They're not price fixing. They're not buying. They're going into suppressing competitors and shutting them down.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel Ortner, Pacific Legal, for this discussion. Thanks for the listeners for listening to us on Mojo 50 and worldwide, I might add. Been fun being with all of you. We'll see you again very soon.